do miss the music.
Wait, it was on earlier.
Good evening and welcome to the Wednesday, August 24th, 2022 meeting of the East Lansing Planning Commission. Mr. Menzer, would you please call roll?
I would be happy to. Thank you. Chair Bowman.
Present.
Vice Chair Sullivan.
Here.
Commissioner Williams is absent this evening. Commissioner Wolf.
Here.
Commissioner Lapine is expected soon but is not here now. Commissioner Wagner.
Here.
Commissioner Hendricks.
Here.
Commissioner Boyd is our new member. He is absent this evening. So we have 5 present.
So we have a quorum. Thank you. You have in front of you a copy of the agenda for this evening's meeting. I would entertain a motion to approve that agenda.
So moved.
Second. That's been moved by Commissioner Wagner and seconded by Commissioner Wolf. Is there any discussion on that motion? Very well. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed? That motion carries. And you also have in your packet a copy of the minutes for the July 27th, 2022 meeting. I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved by Vice Chair Sullivan and seconded by Commissioner Wolf. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed? Motion carries as well. Moving us on to, we have no committee reports, so that'll move us on to staff reports and city council updates. Mr. Menzer.
Good evening. The only thing I'd like to share with you is items that took place on the August 16th City Council agenda. The only thing I think that's, well, first of all, a new member was approved to join the commission, Mr. Matt Boyd. He unfortunately is unable to be here. He had a work commitment, but he'll be joining the commission, so there is now 1 vacancy on the commission. So please, for anyone that might hear this, tell your friends to volunteer for the Planning Commission. The other thing, there was an item that we're actually going to see on tonight's agenda to discuss briefly. It was I'm just paging down to it. It was a discussion about fence regulations, height and setback, potentially along having different standards along different city streets. So that was a discussion item that came out of actually a variance denial last year. There was a property, actually 2 properties that had variances with the Zoning Board of Appeals related to height. And those were both denied. It came up at City Council. City Council asked staff to do some research on the issue and bring it back to them. So we did that at the meeting last week, and they voted to introduce a draft amendment and send it to the Planning Commission for ultimately a public hearing. But first, I figured discussion was in order because it's a new topic to the group, and we didn't have enough time to schedule a public hearing. So that's on for discussion later tonight.
It's item 8.1.
Excuse me?
Item 8.1.
Yes. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Menzer? I will add that we actually have one additional interview with a potential candidate this Thursday at 3. So we're there, in as much as it wouldn't discourage anybody from applying. There is one person that has applied and is interviewing, and then we'll have a full component, hopefully, at our next meeting. On item 4, Commissioner announcements. I guess that's what I just did. Somewhat out of line. Item 5, communications from citizens. Now is the time in our meeting when we take written and we review written communication and take verbal communication from members of the public. And generally, we ask that if you've got comments to make on our public hearing this evening, that you hold that until the time that that item is brought up as a public hearing. And so I'm looking at the only 2 members of the public that are here, and knowing full well that they are here for a public hearing, I'm going to move on to communications from citizens and onto indeed to that public hearing, item 6.1. It is Ordinance 1515, a conditional rezoning for a property on West Road. Mr. Menzer.
Thank you very much. So tonight's the public hearing for this I've got the right one up. Thank you. Sorry about that. Got a lot of screens and tabs in front of me going here. So there's a public hearing tonight for a rezoning proposal on West Road. Is the parcel does not have an address. It's immediately west of 3400 West Road. It's on the east side of West Road, north of Abbey, north of ultimately Lake Lansing Road, south of State. So there's a staff memo in your packet. Everything that I'm going over tonight can be found in the meeting packet for this evening's meeting that's on the city's website. So this is a conditional rezoning. The proposal is to rezone from the current zoning, which is B5. It's one of the city's commercial districts. It's Community Retail Sales Business District, and rezone the property to M1, which is it's manufacturing. It's called Manufacturing District. The parcel is 2.41 acres. It's one of 4 that are owned by parcels that are owned by the applicant in this area. They're all lined up, extending from West Road over to Coolidge. So this is different than a straight rezoning, and this is a conditional rezoning. So the applicant, and with the conditional rezoning, they voluntarily offer to condition the rezoning on certain things. So this is a one-sided offer. The applicant has to offer conditions. Planning Commission, City Council, they cannot suggest changes to those commissions or alterations to those, adding them, removing them. So it all has to be a voluntary from the applicant. So in this case, the applicants propose to condition this rezoning on essentially limiting the potential future uses that could be on this parcel in the future. So what they've done, I'll read them off really briefly, but they're all noted in detail in the staff memo, but it would basically be everything that is allowed in M1 with the exception of a contractor storage yard, coal or building material storage yard, kennel, radio and television towers, and then several different medical and adult use medical marijuana uses. So that would be no medical or recreational marijuana grower facilities, processor facilities, or secure transporter facilities. There's also a condition that any uses on the property abide by the performance standards that are found in 2 provisions of the OIP zoning district, and I have them listed at length in the staff memo, but essentially they're performance standards related to odors, smoke, dust, heat, glare, and vibrations. They're all about impacts from potential manufacturing use. So I'm not going to go through all those tonight, but they're all in the staff memo, and there's 2 provisions, but they're from a different zoning district, the OIP district. And also, actually, one of the other ones just to note is that all activities have to take place inside enclosed buildings. So it wouldn't be an open yard, it would take place inside buildings. So as noted, the conditional rezoning, it's a one-way street with the conditions. However, but keep in mind that these conditions would run with the land. They're not tied to the ownership. So just like with a regular rezoning, ownership doesn't necessarily matter. Same with this conditional rezoning that remains rezoned one way with the same conditions regardless of whether the property is sold or not. The other thing to remember here is that there is a time limit that goes into effect for conditional rezoning of 18 months, within which time the ordinance says an approved development and or use of the land must commence. So I'm taking that to be a project that have to commence on the property within 18 months. That can be an extension to that time period can be granted by City Council. So if you're familiar with the property, if you've seen the maps or in the staff memo or taken a visit to the site, right now there's an existing manufacturing or existing industrial warehouse style building on the property at 3400. So this property again is just to the west of that. So inside the building that is on the site, it's about 26,000 change square foot industrial building. There's a racing company in there and the Gentilozzi real estate company. And then to the north of this site, there is a plastics manufacturing company called SRS Corp, just to the north. And then across the street, across West Road, you've got a large Greenstone Credit Services building. Along West Road, you'll see there's other offices. As you go south, there's a hotel under construction. And there are a couple owner-occupied dwellings that face West Road. So tonight's a public hearing for this request. As per the established bylaws of the Planning Commission, tonight the public hearing is really to hear from the public and to discuss the request. At your following meeting on September 14, you'll be making, potentially, depending on how the meeting goes tonight and the discussion, would be making a recommendation to council at the next meeting. I noted this to the chair and I have shared this with the applicant. I went a little out of order, mistakenly in this case, but I think we're safe. So typically in a process like this, what we would do is the first step would be going to City Council, and then City Council introduces the ordinance and sends it to the Planning Commissioner for review. I skipped that step and jumped right to the Planning Commission, so that was my mistake. I think no harm, no foul in this case. What we'll have to do is, and what the wheels are in motion to do, is notice it again, and when we come back on the 14th, we could have another very brief, just open and close public hearing, or depending on if people are here, you could have people share. But to check that box and to make sure that procedural step happens, at the next meeting, we can go through this process again, open and close a public hearing. So, and then everyone will have had their say and notices will have gone out. We will follow proper procedure. So with rezonings, Planning Commission certainly can recommend approval of the proposed district. You could recommend an entirely different district, and City Council has the same really rights. They can approve it, deny it, or approve something entirely different. Zoning, this current piece is Zone B5. There are some tables, and we'll get into in a minute, about the uses that are allowed in B5. There are no minimum lot area standards for B5, but it does require 150 feet of frontage. The M1 proposed district, and keep in mind the lot just east is also Zone M1, has a requirement of minimum of 20,000 square feet, so a little under half an acre of lot area, and a minimum lot frontage of 200 feet. So both the current and this parcel that's under consideration meets the standards for both the current zoning district and the proposed district. In the staff memo, there are, I think, 4 criterion that are used to consider rezonings. So we go over those in detail in the staff memo, the first of which is the city's master plan. So the future land use map in the 2018 master plan shows this parcel as C2. So C2 is envisioned as this office, retail, service, restaurant, lab uses in buildings of up to 6 stories. And the idea was to provide a transition between the land use options in the C3 land use category in the master plan and some of the other uses allowed in C1. So the category that reflects that best in the current zoning districts, the zoning ordinance is the B5 district. Another criteria is the uses that are the compatibility, basically the compatibility of the uses allowed in the current district and the uses that are in the proposed district. There's a table in the staff memo on page 6 that just compares and contrasts those uses. Really, they're under B5, it's more of a commercial, retail, office nature, and M1 talks a lot more about light industrial, manufacturing, warehousing. And what this table does not reflect are the restricted uses based on the conditional portion of this rezoning. So another criterion is the public services. At this time, sometimes when projects come through the city, they are, like a rezoning could be attached. We allow a rezoning and a development project to run concurrently together through the process. In this case, this is only the rezoning. The applicants indicated there will be a development project on the heels of this in the near future. But at this time, there is no development project, so I don't have a lot of review on public services and utilities. I did check with our Department of Public Works and Environmental Services. There is utility capacity in this area, the details of which will be examined when a proposal comes along. And then the last criteria is related to whether the uses allowed under the proposed rezoning will be equally or better suited to the area than uses allowed under the current zoning of the land. Probably the most subjective of the criteria for rezoning. I made some comments here just related to kind of the land uses that are in the general vicinity. It's one of the few areas in the city that have any sort of light manufacturing and industrial land uses. So in my looking around the town, we have the Amtech station that's zoned. There's 2 districts you could find light manufacturing or industrial uses in the city. It's M1 or OIP, Office Industrial Park. So the areas around the city are Amtrak station on Harrison Road, that's zoned M1. The former city's DPW current Red Cedar Spirit site on Merritt Road is zoned OIP. There's an undeveloped site on Chandler Road, north of Lake Lansing, that I'm not sure what used to be there, but whatever was there was demolished. On the east side of Chandler is zoned OIP. So given that, the area right around that's the parcel that's proposed for rezoning, there are a handful of residences along the actually face west road, but most of the other residential is east of Coolidge. So this area may be suitable for future industrial light manufacturing, especially when you consider the current use of the building on the parcel adjacent east and the plastics manufacturer that is located directly adjacent north. So there's kind of this hub has developed, and granted it's 2 buildings, but with the potential for a third site to join. But this area has kind of, in practice, ended up being this area of light manufacturing industrial. The table on page 7 just looks at the kind of the setbacks and the land coverage standards in compares and contrasts between the 2 zoning districts. And there's not much to share there. You'll note if you read the application materials that this parcel, the applicant is currently working with this company called Attesteo to occupy the existing building at 3400 West. So the idea behind this rezoning is that the uses that are in 3400 West, which had retained the M1 zoning when all the other properties in that kind of that 4 parcel strip were rezoned to B5 in early 2020. The piece that retained the M1, those uses need a home. So that the applicant owns all 4 parcels in the area. What they're saying in the application is that this parcel, if rezoned to M1, would then be developed with a building for the uses that are currently in at 3400 to move west into a new building, and this company Attesteo would occupy 3400 West. But I'm sure they can share more detail on that. So I didn't include a motion or anything for tonight because it is just a public hearing. I didn't receive any communications, written or otherwise, from residents or anyone else in the area. The applicants are here in the room tonight to answer any questions and explain this request further, and certainly I'm available for any questions as well.
Any questions for Mr. Menzer? Commissioner Wolf.
First, a small correction. I'm pretty sure the parcel that has the building on it did not retain M1. It was rezoned to that just a few years ago when the split happened. Before that, it was OIP, if I remember
Okay.
right. Yeah. So the whole parcel was, and that portion was rezoned to M1. I have a couple of questions about the surrounding properties, which you may or may not know the answers to. In the diagrams, and as you said, the property to the north is shown as currently having a manufacturing use, correct? The
Yeah.
one right north of this, but it's shown as being zoned B4. Do you know anything about how that happened?
I don't know about the use and the zoning. I can confirm that the use is this SRS Corp. I looked
Yeah.
them up. They do some sort of plastic. It's like a plastic. The applicant may be able to explain it better than I can. I read their site and I wasn't
But
sure.
it sounded
exactly.
as though it might not be compatible.
It might not be
allowed them to
compatible with. In fact, it would not be compatible with current zoning, but it's pre-existed, and I don't know when it started.
I'm just trying to think about the impact of this change on the other properties. So my other question is, the property to the south is the long east-west one that has the marijuana store over on Coolidge. I seem to remember some comments about that, but my question is the west end of that property considered developable? Do you know anything about the land, or?
I don't know, but I'll find out.
I'm wondering if it's wetlands, or if we're likely to have some other application for something there.
I'll see what I can find.
And then I assume, as usual, all the surrounding properties were notified about this rezoning?
Yes, we, as required under state law, we send notices to everyone within 300 feet from the boundary, the parcel line of the parcel proposed for rezoning.
And so we haven't heard from anyone?
No.
I was particularly interested in Greenstone Credit, who was right across the road, and they had some comments about an earlier rezoning. So, okay, thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Menzer? All right, then. The applicants are here. I'll invite you to come forward, and if you're welcome to, we've read the proposal, the application you pulled together, but if you want to hit the high points, or
Sure.
maybe start by addressing the Commissioner Wolf's question, since it
Perfect.
looks like you had an idea about an answer there.
My name's Paul Gentilozzi.
Sorry, Paul.
From Gentilozzi Real Estate. I've been before you before. It's my son John, my partner. We've owned the land for 21 years. And I've been in the real estate development business in Lansing, going to be 53 years this year. Long time. Was one of the founding partners of University Place in downtown East Lansing, the hotel and office complex. And proud of the relationship we've had with the city and the position we've held. So, I'm going to let John talk about the zoning part of it. I'll answer the other questions. He's a lot smarter than me about that. But I wanted to talk about my neighbors and talk about what we're doing with the existing building that we're in, because City Council has approved some things, some abatements in brownfields, and I wear a couple different hats here because of my role as a director of the Michigan Strategic Fund. So what we've done with Attesteo, let's deal with Attesteo first. Attesteo is a German testing company that's in 7 countries around the world. And what they're coming to do in our building is a 15-year lease as a test facility, essentially a dynamometer test and endurance facility for electric motors and transmissions in automobiles. The first one in the nation, and Attesteo's 8th in the world, between Germany and France and England and China, and soon another one to open. They've been in there. Attesteo is wholly owned by the Scheffler family in Germany, and directly they're the best testing company in the world. So they will work for all the automotive producers that build electric cars or components for electric cars, and our building will have test cells in it that will run endurance on these motors, transmissions, and other driveline components. They originally came to the MEDC, and the MEDC put out an FRP, and I submitted blindly, so I don't have any conflicts of interest. And we were put on a short list, and that short list then went to presentation with Attesteo, and we sold them on East Lansing. We sold them on a couple things. The economics of the community, but its proximity to Michigan State. Attesteo runs these cells. There will be 22 plus 2. One's an NVH cell, noise and vehicle. Okay, noise, vibration, and heart. I'm glad I brought my expert. And they use students in part and full-time capacities because the cell has to have an attendant. It's not like they do internal combustion dynamometers all over the world also. This will be all electric, so it'll be quiet. And they have to have an operator in the test. The test cell is, I might as well just ask him how big they are.
8 meters by 6 meters,
Right.
or 19 by 30, give or take.
Yeah, I'm in metric school because everything comes from them metrically. So 19 by 30. And there's a steel plate. They put the engine on it, the motor. Motors are driven by electricity. Engines are driven by gasoline. And they run it, and the attendant sits there, and if the red light goes off, he hits the shut-off button. So it's great for students because they can study, they can look at TikTok, they can do pretty much anything they want. 3 shifts a day, 8 hours a shift, 7 days a week, these machines run. And so it creates great stuff for graduate students and for students who work 4 to 8 hours of shift, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days a week, whatever they fill in on their schedule. And so from an economic hat, I thought it was great for the community because it's going to make a lot of jobs that don't ask you if you want your order biggie sized. It's a real job that turns into a career later. So we were impressed by that. Testeo's committed to 15 years, and their total spend, and I'll again ask my expert, I know it'll be more than $20 million.
It's currently 26.
$26 million of investment into the building, into infrastructure in the building. They're a large electric user, larger than any other in the city of East Lansing. We have a lot of power currently in that building, a 443 phase. Consumers is bringing additional transformers. Would be a good steward of the building. That meant we had to go somewhere. I had a lot of possibilities of where to go in the greater Lansing area. We own property in 3 counties and all the local municipalities, but we like where we are. We like our neighbors. They've become friends, the Greenstone folks in particular. And we'd have a couple hundred new employees working there. But I haven't seen you folks since all the leases for the state of Michigan got canceled. Everywhere. There are no new state leases. There aren't going to be any new state leases. The impact to the greater Lansing area is that 300,000 square feet of private sector leases are canceled. So when you think of downtown Lansing, which I'd worked in since 1965, 11,000 employees will no longer be in private sector property tax paying buildings. They're not only not going to be there, they don't come to work downtown. 1 day a week, maybe. So the restaurants, the city of Lansing downtown has seen an impact of about $50 million a year. And it's going to take us a long time to recover from that. The office building market, universally, we just completed a study for the Tri-County area. Lansing always had about 40,000 square feet, greater Lansing area, 40,000 square feet vacant in the office building market. And it's particularly sensitive to your group. There is, within 300 yards of 3400 West Road, 325,000 square feet of vacant office space. Been vacant for more than 3 years, gonna be vacant for more than 3 years as we look forward. Those are economic realities that we can't stop and we can't change quickly. So we have to adapt and understand what we can do. We just concluded our numbers for the city of East Lansing and the city of Lansing. Metropolitan area will have 750,000 square feet of vacant space this year. The economic impact for that is over $100 million of rents that people aren't going to get, and property tax appeals, which will mean the reduction of values, which will mean the reduction of taxes. The trickle down from what's happened to our community is significant. So originally we've had a plan to build an office for Eagle, and on the West Road frontage we always wanted to do a tech building. When we bought the land, it was zoned OIP, and we bought it because office and industrial park was what we always envisioned to do. The last time we came before you, there was a big movement to enact a form-based code. So when we took the current zoning for that front parcel, it was on the premise that we would have form-based code soon, and we could conform to the right kind of tech buildings that we felt appropriate and marketable. Having a zoning is good. Having a zoning you can actually put something that pays rent or can be used is the other shoe that has to drop somewhere in the process. We've been a good neighbor. Greenstone, all the people around us, I don't think the city council has ever had a complaint about our uses. We don't make noise, we don't disrupt. We've had, the employees we started with there 20 years ago are all still with us, same people. They live around the community, and we think they're good neighbors. So, to the north, that land, the owner of the property to the north, Don Maynard, most of you who have been around a while probably know Don. Don left us here a little while ago, and he sold the land, our 10 acres, he sold the land to a company, a Japanese company, who built a plastics manufacturing and recycling building. That's what our building was. They sold the building to the Jimmy Ippolito's wife and her sister. I've lost their Spatafor family. They bought it. It sat vacant for 3 years. We bought it from them, moved in, and have been there for more than 20 years. Don, when the plastics manufacturing company went out of business, Don moved it next door into his building, bought all the machinery, and operated a plastics recycling business there until just recently. And then he sold that. That one grinding machine is still there. And I don't know who owns SRS?
That's still Don's company. It's
Okay.
just run by different people now.
All right. So it's still a plastics recycling. Doesn't make any noise, doesn't make any dust. I don't know whether they're non-conforming existing condition. I'm not sure. That'd be expertise for you guys to know. But Don owned all of that office park land and developed it to the east and north of him. And he did a great job. He platted it and sold it and built office buildings. And Donnie was a very interesting guy to deal with, but a pretty smart guy, and got it done. And we have an office park that's producing and part of the community. So we've met with all of our neighbors. We've talked to them about what we want to do. And I'm 50, Genealosi Real Estate's going to be 53 years here. We're proud of what we've developed in the community. Great buildings, big buildings, pretty buildings. We're going to build a real pretty building. We've shown it to the folks at Greenstone because we're going to be, people who come to see them are at their driveway, and we don't want them to be embarrassed by what we do. We don't want to be embarrassed by what we do. So we're going to build the nicest, fanciest tech building we can build because we want you guys to be proud of what we do. We're all in the same community here together. So I was going to only talk a minute. I apologize for exceeding that. And I'll let John, the smarter half of our team, talk to you. And if you have any questions for me, feel free to ask, and we'll try to get you the yes, sir.
Do you have any knowledge about the property to the south and the developability of it?
Yeah, John does. He can answer it, and why they don't split it, and he'll let him answer. He's my zoning expert. Thank you for your time.
Yeah. Actually, I think I know why they won't split it, but.
You and I, first of all, John Gentilozzi Real Estate, 3400 West Road. To answer your question, and I can't read their minds, however, based on the overlay district for marijuana sales that exists in the northern tier, were they to break any portion of that property off, they would lose the exclusivity of being the only dispensary in the area. Their parcel is very long and very narrow, and once you apply the limits of, I think it's a 500 or 1,000 foot radius, the existence of that parcel effectively zones out anything else that could be built there. Could they build another building on the same parcel? Yes, perhaps they could, but I think just the existence of the parcel shape is a really good deterrent for anyone else putting up a competing dispensary. As for the quality of the land, there was a single family home and a pole barn there for really a long time. There's some wetland in there for sure, and in fact, the Green Peak development came with a wetlands permit to directional bore below the wetland to access the sewer on the West Road side because Coolidge Road isn't adequately, properly served by sewer at that location. So the cheaper and easier course was to bore underneath the wetland, give or take 1,000 feet somehow. A little bit of northern tier trivia for you. So also just to make mention of Greenstone, to my recollection, they didn't have any issue during the Eagle process or the rezoning or the lot splits. We in fact brought the conditional rezoning offer of excluding marijuana based on Green Peak's concerns over the Sky Mint dispensary. They were Greenstone, sorry. Yeah, Green Peak, Greenstone, Sky, whatever. The bank was I will say, very directly against the development of that dispensary, and so we took those comments to heart, and we still do today as we offer our conditional rezoning, because certainly you could grow on that site, you could do anything marijuana related on that site, but we're willing to put that aside for a lot of reasons. And as well, when the notices went out, most of them would have gone to Greenstone. The 2 vacant parcels directly across from us are owned by Greenstone, including the house, which no one seems to live in at the moment, and a small sliver of land right next to it. So Greenstone owns essentially their parcel, 2 vacants, up to the small white house that's on the west side of West Road, adjacent to the new hotel development. So there isn't exactly a huge number of neighbors. As for Don, I can't necessarily say there wasn't a ton of manufacturing. Certainly you could construe what goes on there as mainly office functions and sales functions with some inventory held out back. But we've never had an issue with them. To bring us up to today, and a point that we make in our narrative is that if this parcel was C3 under the new proposed code, or form-based code, we wouldn't be here today. Under C3, this type of development and office development are both clearly permitted in that. And if I won't stretch your memory, but I will mention that when we came to you previously for the first set of rezonings, we made a pretty detailed argument discussion about why those parcels should be destined for C3, and I would almost argue that most of that northern tier north of Abbey Road from Coolidge to the highway are really more suited for the uses in C3. The uses in C2, I would say, are analogous really to B4, a limited type of commercial development, lesser scope. C3, the uses permitted there are very open and reasonable for the type of land that's available there. And just also to back up a little bit onto OIP, we went through a very long discussion about OIP the last time we were before you folks. And in parcel sizes really below 20 acres or of the geometry that we have, the OIP zoning is almost impossible to pull off any other development other than what's on the site currently. So for all of those reasons, as we rezoned for Eagle and brought the M1 zoning to the current site, we wouldn't necessarily, if we were just building an office building on that West Road frontage, we wouldn't necessarily be here to change the zoning, but we know we have to move. That's where we'd like to go. We believe that M1 is suitable there, and the conditional rezoning, I would add, is based on, we offered the exact same conditions that were approved under Ordinance 1585, which is what rezoned West Road, 3400 West Road, the existing building. And that was part of our discussion initially when we kind of looked at the M1, and I believe there were some concerns that there's not really a lot of controls under M1. There are no environmental noise controls, anything like that. So we voluntarily offered to maintain the OIP conditions just to keep the nature of the site the same. And we do make the point in the narrative that there's a lot of office space in the city of East Lansing. Let's not be shy about it, and there's 3 buildings near us that are for sale, have been for sale for quite some time. There's a 20,000 square foot development that is now very lovely turf at the corner of West and Abbey Road that never came to fruition through COVID. So we also know in our search around Lansing, when we looked for industrial buildings, an industrial building might be the wrong word. You shouldn't think of a concrete block building with fading paint and no windows. That's not what industrial buildings are now. If you look around near the highways, if you look around suburban Detroit, these are very nice, modern buildings that are built to quality energy standards, will exceed the minimum insulation in this building by a huge margin based on the construction method that we've selected. It's a new day for that type of building and that type of flexible use. There just isn't a lot of that inventory in the Lansing area, and certainly within East Lansing, that inventory just doesn't exist. And we believe strongly in it. We believe strongly that those uses are gonna come forward and are gonna be more viable. And I think as well, when we look at what our conversations with at Testeo were, they said, we need a university base. We need students to draw from. And it's not just someone to sit and make sure the test cycles correctly. It's engineers, electricians, and people that they can bring in to a proper apprenticeship. And I don't mean, hey, here's what you do every day. This is the German works style apprenticeship where you're taught a trade by this company and you're meant to be a long-term employee. You're sent to Germany to learn sort of how their business works and how the technical side of their business, and they wanted a place to draw from. And when you look at an industrial building and you look at the use that they're putting into it, and I can tell you that just based on the meetings that we've had thus far, this is going to be an incredibly impressive facility. The things that it's capable of are unparalleled in this area. And that's the type of building that we need to bring. That's the type of company that springs from universities. If there's a company that comes out of Michigan State, we can't have them leave and go to suburban Detroit because that's the building that they find that's suitable for them. We need to keep those things in East Lansing, and the only way to do that is to offer places where those people can go, places for them to start. And while we may occupy this building initially, the building will be there long, long past our use and will be suitable for those types of companies to spring up. And certainly we would hope as the form-based code changes and those types of developments come through that more would happen in that area. But we would also encourage you, and as you'll see when our site plan comes, to produce light industrial buildings that fit with their surroundings. We can't have it be, there's obviously the industrial building. The landscaping has to be correct. The finishes have to be correct. All of these things, anyone who brings this to you again needs to be held to the same standards that we're trying to set for that type of building in East Lansing. So, with all of that said, I'm glad to answer any questions or talk through any concerns that you might have.
Any questions for the applicant? Vice Chair.
Just in looking at the map here, and I don't recall what the discussion was the last time you were before us, but the two parcels that are to the east, are those developable or is that mostly wetlands?
No, they are very much developable.
Okay.
So the parcel directly to the east of the existing building was going to be the home of the Eagle building, and we were able to fit 100 parking spots, full subsurface detention system, and 25,000 square feet onto that site, which I will give full credit to DC Engineering that we actually got all that through. And even at that, the impact into the wetlands at that point was incredibly minimal and only based on the absolute necessity to get the building sort of positioned on the site. And then the parcel further to the east on Coolidge Road does hold developable land. It may not be 20,000 square feet, but there's still good quality land there for a lot of different uses under B5, and we're fine with B5 there. There really is that's a good place for that parcel.
Okay. And then just a quick follow-up.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why you're planning on doing M1 for the two to the west
Yes.
as its own proposal, and then potentially down the line, the two B5s to the east could be a separate proposal, and
Yes.
those would theoretically be connected by a road that runs east to west from West Road to Coolidge?
Yes, absolutely. As part of our earlier site plans, we did have that road shown, and it would be our desire to do exactly that. I mean, the flow of the site, the traffic studies all indicated that connection has to be made along there. And we did package that road successfully through there after considerable work. Yes, sir.
Also, we haven't mentioned, our plan for the West Road parcel, if approved, is to build a 16,000 square foot building for us. We're getting smaller from 26 to 16, but we'd also like to build a 6,000 or 8,000 square foot building for lease to attract another tenant. So that we would propose two buildings on that site. One, because we think there's future demand that would come for a tech building that we can relate to the university, because they're not available. If you go to Bloomfield Hills, one of the most, I hate to use the term hoity, but Birmingham, Bloomfield Hills, pretty upscale neighborhood. We visited a tech park there that has exactly the kind of tenants that we want for this site. And there isn't anything like that in the city of Lansing, but there's really good demand. And we think the breakthrough of showing what we can do with a Testeo will carry on forward. And so we'd like to develop in total on that 2+ acres, well within the usage, the allowable usage of the zoning. We'd like to develop 2 buildings that will be about 22,000 square feet in total, a value of $3 million of construction.
And certainly, as we bring our site plan forward for that site, we can obviously show what that would look like and how that would be integrated into the rest of the site.
Thank you. Other questions for Joel?
Yeah, directly related to that, rezonings like this are easier for us if they come through with a site plan. And of course, that's exactly what you did last time
Yes.
with the Eagle Building and so
Yes.
forth, and we could see exactly what was going to happen there. And then, I'll make that comment, and then a related one, obviously, you will have to move out of 3400 West Road before a Testeo can move in. So you're going to have to build at least your first building before you can move out? Is that correct?
We are going to be very busy this fall. We have a fairly detailed contingency plan for how we're going to get through this entire process. And we have site engineers working on the site plan, but we wanted to get things moving so that unfortunately we can't bring them all together just because of timing. But certainly what we're going to propose will be very consistent within the district.
But, so are you planning to move out before they move in? And so
We'll be out of the
it's
building.
leading up to the question of, do we know when they might be operational?
We will be out of the building December 15th. We're going to be homeless. Luckily,
Okay.
I own some other buildings. So we're going to move. Well, I shouldn't. We're going to be out of half the building December 15th. The truck bay of the building, they're going to start construction on the first 9 or 10 cells. They have to get approvals by
okay.
you guys. So they're going to allow us to stay in about 9,000 square feet with some of our stuff. And we're going to, if approved, we'd like to build the new building starting in December. And I hate to build in the wintertime, but it's what we have to do. So we would be starting in December, occupying in May or June, which leaves us 6 months
Wow.
to be somewhere else. And we've got a plan to do that. So we'll be occupying we own a 10 or 12,000 foot building in DeWitt Township. I can kick that tenant out, move in there until we get this new building done, and then we'll be in sometime in the spring.
All right, thank
And
you.
then a Testeo, so we have to be out of the truck bay in May, so we can move that stuff into the new building under construction, a lot of moving parts. And I can say that when we come back to you, I think on the 14th, we'll have a proper rendering for you. We want you to see what,
It won't be a site plan, but we'll give you an indication of
Yeah.
what the site plan is going to be based upon and how it will sit on the site, that sort of thing, and an elevation as well.
The civil engineering profession backlog is 16, 18 weeks. So we've started that process. We had complete civil engineering for the doggy daycare we tried to do a few years ago. So we're adapting that to the new buildings. The groundwater and all that stuff is pretty similar, but Dave Christian from DC Engineering, who's doing our stuff, is hurrying as fast as he can. But we'll be able to bring you a plan for what the building will look like and where it'll be on the site. And we're going to be well within all the setbacks and requirements. Because we don't want you to approve something blind. We always try to give as much education as we can. But yeah, Testeo, they're in a hurry. And we
So it
told-
sounds like you're saying they could be operating a year from now. there.
Oh,
Less than that.
Less than that.
Our
Okay.
biggest, and I can't necessarily speak to a completely detailed construction timeline at this point, just
Yeah,
because
that's good enough.
we're through enough of the engineering to know that there are some items that have longer lead times, as with everything in construction these days. So I see them operating easily into next year, first or second quarter probably next year.
The pressure they're putting on us is they'd like to open some test cells at the end of the first quarter of next year. So they're planning, we're pushing all the trades, all Greater Lansing trades, electricians and mechanical contractors, and everybody is from the area, so they're making a lot of jobs, and they're spending a lot of money. It'll be a significant spend, but we'll have a good drawing for you and a good site plan before. It won't be approved because
It won't have been submitted.
we won't have been.
But it will be enough of a rendering for you to
Yeah.
say, and certainly the Truth in Rendering Act that exists in East Lansing, if we come back to you with the official site plan and it's different than what we've shown you in this rezoning meeting, feel free to hold our feet right to the fire about it.
No, we're gonna save the trees on West Road, and it's our home, so we wanna be proud.
Sure.
We want you to be proud.
Other Commissioner Sullivan, Vice Chair.
Yeah, I think one of the unfortunate casualties of shifting from a B5 to an M1, though, is the height limitation that the M1 imposes. Can you tell us whether or not you're going to build up to 4 stories on this site? Okay, just 2 stories.
Just 2 stories, yeah.
I-
We don't need the really high cube space is not what we're aiming at. We're not looking,
Yeah.
Amazon distribution center where it's pallet racks up to 30 or 40 feet. Once you get above 25 feet of clear height inside, that serves really a wide range of uses.
Got it.
We're planning 24 feet.
Got it. Just an interesting comment as we potentially continue discussions in a form-based code about how maybe, I don't know, there could be another kind of in between these 2 options down the line. But thank you.
Any other questions?
Just to follow up on that, so the building you're in now there was built by an entirely different company for a different business. You didn't need all the height that it has, is that correct?
We enjoy it, and certainly to fit our semis inside, we did need that height in our addition, and it allows us, we're about 25 feet clear to the center of the peak of the roof, and that allows us to get a second-story mezzanine, and it's a Butler building, a modular steel building, and they sort of come in that height range. That's really the bread and butter of that type of building. For us, in a normal industrial use, as long as you can get 2 habitable floors in it, not that you're doing your maybe office space on the second floor, that's all the height you need. The excess height is really there for people with tall storage requirements or some other process that requires a particularly tall assembly line or equipment or something like that.
Our new building will be the same height as our existing building.
Oh, well,
Yeah,
Okay.
we're not proposing a very tall building. It'll be very much.
no, I thought it was actually going to be lower. I thought the one that you're in now was something like 35, 40.
No.
Okay.
It's I wanted.
It's
All right.
a peaked
It's-
roof, the new one will be a flat roof. Pitched.
Yeah, it's consistent with the height and the
Yeah,
existing
Okay,
one.
I guess I was mistaken there.
Yeah, it's not actually that high.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
We will see you on the 14th.
Sounds good.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Thanks, guys.
That'll move us on to our next portion of the agenda, old business, and item 7.1, the future land use map updates.
Taylor, give me a second to get pulled up here.
Hey y'all.
Welcome back.
I'm sure one day I'll be up here not doing a presentation. Give us some variety.
You're going to provide a quick recap, or, okay,
I
because I was
will.
going to say, it seems to me that we left it,
Yeah,
according to my notes, with the.
we'll go over what we
Good.
talked about
Yep.
at the last work session. Not all of the planning commission was there, and obviously, members of the public who weren't there we'll need an update. So we'll go over briefly what we talked about. I have some slides summarizing all the kind of comments that you guys had on each of the properties. We'll move through those fairly quickly. We have a couple other agenda items to get through as well. So I'll do my best to be quick about it while still being very clear. So there won't be questions until we get to like the new part of the presentation, and I'll tell you when we're past the old stuff, right? So this is from the original presentation, and it just talks about the perspective that we're using, right? So we're looking at the future land use map and other strategies related to the future land use map updates to address the housing issues in the city, right? So increasing housing, addressing the disparity between the supply and the increasing rising demand, particularly focusing on that missing middle housing, which is primarily focused in East Lansing on young professionals, and diversifying the housing types that are attractive to that kind of demographic that we have a lot of and we want to retain, but we're missing that affordable middle kind of housing. So the perspective to increase housing density in the city, we looked at a map to kind of identify areas. We had criteria, distance to retail, distance to amenities, distance to commercial areas, to identify some areas that we really wanted to look deeply at and see if we can increase density in these areas, primarily because the infrastructure is already there, so you can increase density. So you can keep going. This was the first place we talked about, expanding the R4 North a couple blocks in the Abbott, off Abbott Road, right by College Grove, actually right near this site. So you can go to the next slide. We're going to go pretty fast. So this is kind of talking about what we proposed, expanding the R4 North, and that would expand on what's already there. It's suited for the infrastructure that's available. Go ahead. Oh. Okay. All right, so this is kind of what was mentioned. There was a couple comments on that particular topic had been considered already in 2018 when the flume was developed. There had been some members of the public who had resisted that kind of change or had proposed alternatives at lower densities, and those were considered. There's some other areas some other comments about looking at other areas in that similar area and just turning up the density as opposed to expanding higher densities. So those are things that were mentioned. We'll move on to our second one that we looked at, which was Abbott Road and Saginaw. So that's an area where there's a lot of commerce. There's lots of businesses, offices, a lot of amenities, a lot of park structure there, and a lot of residents. So that's a good area to increase density. So we discussed the opportunity to increase density by changing it from, in the flume, from C2 to M2, I believe. And then, so we talked about how that would capitalize on existing infrastructure and the existing populace that lives there, so a lot of residential, but also still a lot of commercial units. If you could go to the next one. And so some comments that we had for that one was that there's a lot of existing thriving office buildings there, that they're not vacant, they're not empty, so changes would be not as feasible perhaps because they're well occupied. You can go to the next slide. The guiding questions at the bottom of those slides are just talking about the questions that we kind of asked ourselves throughout, how we guided ourselves. So Trowbridge is also known as the Flower Pot neighborhood. We talked about moving the R2 up to a M2 designation to increase density in that area. Some of the comments that we received from PC in the work session was that, again, kind of instead of expanding density, increasing existing density and kind of turning up the residential density. So, for example, that R1 into an R2 as opposed to expanding that M3 as an option. And then other considerations were what's MSU going to do down there, which is a very good consideration, and the economic pressures in the area, something to consider as well. So then we're moving into the new stuff. Yep, so this is the northern tier. You guys have seen this map before. I've presented on the northern tier in the past. For people who don't know, this is the area north of Lake Lansing Road. All of the city north of Lake Lansing Road is considered the northern tier. So the first half of the presentation was talking about the strategy to increase or amend densities in the flume now to increase residential densities for housing. But the second portion of our strategy, what we're going to talk about now, is kind of talking about northern tier changes. So the opportunity here would be to designate residential units all along the western side, where the C3 is. And so the opportunities here are that there's new infrastructure into the area, some new roads, there's capacities for utilities and things like that that have been put into the area over the last decade. There's a lot of undeveloped lots, right? So we just had a rezoning proposal come up, right, that we talked about one of the undeveloped lots, and there's several up there, and they're large parcel sizes, so that has an opportunity for development that smaller lot sizes don't offer as easy development as large parcel sizes do. Okay, you can go back. So this is where we can talk about this and the, kind of those same guiding questions that we had before. If there was comments from you guys, we could talk about those. We could talk about those at the end. Okay, so then we'll move into the new side. This is the second portion of the strategy. We're talking about implementing existing land use. So the first part is looking at the land use map and saying, well, these areas could be higher density. Second one is, well, these areas are already call for higher density. Let's start implementing them in a phased and intentional manner. Could you go to the next slide? So that will primarily look like lots of rezonings, right? So the flume calls for rezonings in certain areas that across the city, right? They call for new designations in some areas just increased density. And a good example of this is the Cedar Village area. So the area just north of the Cedar Village is an area well suited to begin the rezoning process, and the designations in the flume align well with increased density, as well as the current housing types and density that exists now, as well as the businesses in the area. So they're well aligned for looking through a housing perspective, increased density, and so it's a good area to begin those kind of rezonings. We wouldn't be touching East Village because it's already been it's its own district. We're mostly talking about the area north of it. And so it would be a good area to begin that process of educating intentional rezoning. So that would begin with educating people in the community, educating people in neighborhoods who would be impacted by the rezonings, and then beginning the actual process. You guys are familiar with the process of rezonings. You know, it goes through public hearings, it goes through city council and you guys, and back to city council. So there's lots of formal processes, but it would look like many, like larger cohorts of rezonings, just aligning them with what's already been approved with the flume, or envisioned, I should say, not approved, but envisioned for the city. So if you could go to the next slide. And then the third portion of the strategy to increase housing density in the city would be implementing what's something you're very familiar with, the Shaping the Avenue zoning district in the downtown. So this area also calls for increased density, calls for more mixed use along this corridor, and it also calls for diversifying housing types while also aligning a lot of the design characteristics for the area. So it calls for a lot of townhomes, condos, apartments, duplexes in the area, new development, and it incentivizes redevelopment. So it streamlines the process so that people are more incentivized to redevelop areas with higher density and in alignment with already pre-approved guidelines and things like that. So it allows for that to happen. Like similar to the other rezonings, the process would be the same, right? Education initiatives, reviewing with city council, and then actually implementing the changes. If you go to the next slide, these are considerations for which areas we should begin with. By implementing the STA, for example, it would be a phased implementation, and we've looked at several characteristics as to why this area is good. We've talked about housing types, occupancy, rental overlay boundaries, and historic district boundaries. If you could go to the next slide, we can see some maps that display that information. So we see the frontages map, the STA map, the proposed changes, and then we see historic district map, with the historic district boundaries and the rental overlays. And we see the flume and the current zoning, and then also a rental map. So it shows the housing types that are there and the projections for what's there. There's larger maps in the packet. I know these are a little bit small, but we didn't want to get into them too deeply today. We just want to talk about them as the third prong of this perspective and increasing housing density. So that's the end of my presentation on talking about the opportunities we have to discuss. Yeah, this might be a time to respond to questions you have or what the appropriateness of you feel these strategies are.
Thanks. Does anybody have any preference if we want to actually go back and start at, say, at the northern tier? Where
Yeah, we can
sort
start
of
at the
left off
northern tier.
last time?
I want us to get through it so that we can
That's-
get
no, that's
into
fine.
it at the end, yeah. So I can offer some guiding questions, or you can go ahead and offer your
No,
own.
please.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
I
some,
just said that's where we left off last time.
yeah, that is where we left off. So some guiding questions we can discuss would be like, does the area support this potential increased density? The area to the western edge currently is primarily undeveloped. There are some financial institutions, some light manufacturing like the Gentilosi's have mentioned. They're actually outside of this district. This district is actually just across the street from them, but nearby. And then another one would be, does it align with SAP's surrounding area? Would it be suited well for increased density, right? And then if we get through those two questions, are there alternatives that you think that would be better? So we selected M2 as the suggestion to talk about those opportunities. M2 offers increased residential as well as allowing for commercial to exist in the same space. So as opposed to just rezoning the entire area strictly residential, this would allow for commercial areas to exist simultaneously and side by side. So that's what those offer. What are your guys' opinions, if any?
Vice Chair, please.
I think that this area is interesting and it presents some opportunity. If I'm not mistaken, the area that the city is currently reviewing to add housing on off of kind of Coleman Road up there, right, is in this area. So I think Chair Bowman's concern that area would be on an island, I think is valid, and if there's a way we could increase the housing density kind of along this corridor. But as everyone recalls during that discussion, the highway's right there, and that's pretty noisy. And I think maybe there's some creative design functions you could use to mitigate that a little bit. But that could be a drawback to the area. But I think it's intriguing.
Any other questions or thoughts? Yeah, this is a tricky one, right? And it's one of those, it's like you almost have to see what is out there.
What proposals are there?
Yeah, and I know you've got, do you have an RFP out still? Yeah. Request for proposals
Yeah.
for the use of that particular, it's just the Coleman and West Road, not the entire blue section there, obviously.
It's just Coleman and West,
Right.
the 27 acres the city owns.
It's,
Yeah.
it's a puzzle. I've expressed my concerns about it before. I think it'll be interesting to see what somebody that's got some interest in actually making development there has in mind. It seems to me that my take on M2 as opposed to any sort of R function is probably right, or unless you're thinking about one of the upper R, the heavy Rs, as opposed to sort of single-family detached R1, something, I don't know, is it R5, is that the maximum? But that generally, but
the
that's.
flume calls, the highest is R5 in the flume, yeah. If you look at the flume next to the outline of the designation, it's kind of hard to see, it's faint perhaps. The nearest, so it's C2, is the nearest to that, and then there's also an R1 and an R4 that border it. So it's bordered by C2, R4,
I see,
R1.
sure.
So in comparison to considering the surrounding uses and compatibility, yeah. Higher, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Since we have that
parcel, under, not exactly on the market, well, I guess it is on the market.
Yep.
It would certainly help us if we could wait and see what happens with that, see what kind of offers we might get.
I think you're going to get an
I-
answer tonight.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm
And
just
I
saying,
certainly-
generally speaking.
It's a
certainly
longer
agree
process.
this- You know, I keep going back and forth when I think about, I just don't know what is the right course here.
Vice Chair.
I agree, it's tough. I mean, it's helpful to see potential proposals that people will put forth, and just looking at the rest of this outlined area, I just don't know if there's a ton of opportunity with the rest of it, right? You have Greenstone right there, and then some properties to the south. It's heavily wooded. So in a perfect world, potentially some of this could be redeveloped into housing. I just don't know how feasible it is. I'd love to be proven wrong, though.
What's our underlying goal here?
To increase, so the perspective that we're examining this through is increasing housing to address the housing crisis. That there's a housing crisis on the national level, but we see a microcosm on our level as well, where there's a mismatch between supply and demand. So the supply is not meeting the rising demand, and then there's a missing middle type of housing and economic bracket that's not being met by the supply primarily is the issue. So there's a missing middle of types. So this is primarily different demographics such as young professionals or retirees, people who are downsizing for smaller housing. So like townhomes would be well suited to them, condos, duplexes, things like that. That attached housing is ideal for this unit or this particular demographic. And it's a housing that's the missing middle that's missing when you compare the mismatch between the supply and demand that exists now. And this has existed in some form since the 2008 crisis. It's abated a bit before the COVID hit, but it's kind of resumed its stagnation since due to the delays in construction and timetables and all of those things. So it's an issue that we expect to be facing for the next while.
Right. I mean, that makes sense. I just don't see this area as walkable or,
No.
you know, I mean, I don't know what are you going to do with it, but it's already sort of a traffic jam. We have friends up there, and it's hard to get there, and I don't think it's very pleasant. I mean, that's just me. And I don't think the answer is putting more houses in there, but I don't know.
You're talking about Hawk Nest?
Hawk Nest and Chandler's Crossing. It seemed.
Yeah, well, so one of the things, and I don't know, you were being asked to consider what could potentially be done on vacant property, and I found, as you know, the ones you showed earlier and the ones we commented on last time we met, because there's an existing fabric,
uses.
right? It's sort of, you get a sense of, even if, I think as Commissioner Wolf had said, there's sort of those properties on west of Abbott on Saginaw, you know, maybe the changes you proposed are suitable. Whether they'll be implemented or not is another matter, but that sort of you can kind of see what's there,
Yeah.
and as a result of that, you can get a sense about what, you know, potential change might bring when you're talking about a blank slate here.
I appreciate the issue. Oh, go ahead.
No,
Sorry.
I was just saying that I'm just going back to the.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's like almost you need some constraints to make the design better.
And I also think there's on Abbott, there's some mixed-use properties that have been developed at the quarter north of Lake Lansing
Yep,
on
sure.
the right-hand
Yep,
side,
yep, yep.
and it doesn't. I don't see businesses really thriving there, and I don't think occupancy is very high in those units. So I mean, there's been an increase in density, but no one's going there.
Commissioner, yes, please.
One of the things that I think would be really helpful for me, I have not invested much brain space in thinking through this yet because I am really interested to see like what kind of proposals we get. I just feel like maybe it's the cart before the horse. But one of the things that would be helpful, I think, as I think through some of this rezoning and these proposals that I appreciate is some data that supports that we need more housing in East Lansing. I'd really love some kind of like occupancy data because I think to your point, I mean, out in this area is where we have some of the largest apartment complexes that over the years as we've built more downtown East Lansing are the ones that are empty and frankly we're starting to see higher rates of crime at. So I'm hesitant about making decisions on this type of development or rezoning until there's some tangible data for the fact that all of our apartments and townhouses are full. I'm just not sure that I'm seeing the solution yet, and I think I'm a data person, and seeing some kind of tangible data would be really helpful for me to help wrap my brain around this.
Yeah.
Are you talking about this site in particular, or all the, because
I think a couple of these pieces where this site in particular, because I think, as you stated nicely, I mean, if we can develop the housing for that middle sector that we're always talking about, I mean, that's huge. I haven't seen us do a whole lot of that in recent years. It's predominantly been, I would think it's fair to say, apartments. And I have many friends that are around my age, around my economic status in life at this phase, and people don't look to East Lansing because, like, to your point, we don't necessarily have the types of things they're looking for. They're new builds, so they're incredibly expensive, and I think I need to see more data.
Commissioner Wolf?
I think we had a lot of data in the housing study that was done, a year and a half ago, or however long that was. And my feeling about that was that we sort of left that unfinished or something. I'm not sure what the plan was for it, but I never saw a conclusion with staff or city council or a final report. It seemed like it was always in draft and didn't get finished. But what I recall is that it showed that there was demand for certain kinds of housing in East Lansing, but perhaps it was going to be difficult to get those built because of the economics of it. That's what we would have to overcome to satisfy that demand for people who, I mean, the consultant told us there were people who would like to live in East Lansing and couldn't find the housing they wanted. I mean, that data, we have that data from the consultant.
I'm sorry, Mr. Menzer and then Vice Chair.
We can, to your point, we can summarize some of that. I mean, the study itself is a bit of a bear to get through. There's a lot of appendices, and it's in there in a roundabout way, but we can put some summary documents, some summary information. To me, the kind of the final piece of the housing study, and it was really more of a target market. I think housing study is a bit of a misnomer. It was really a target market analysis. It told us exactly what Commissioner Wolf was saying. It identified the people that there is a market of people, and who those people are based on credit reports, who they are, and what do they want to live in here. So it's kind of a prescription that if you build this type of thing, we know that there is X market out there, and those people are going to be able to pay X because they fit this specific credit. So we can summarize some of that stuff, because I mean, it's all kind of disparate thoughts. So to your point, I mean, coming back to the group with that piece is certainly something we're going to need if this initiative goes forward, or maybe if pieces of this initiative go forward. It will be important, certainly not just for the commissioners here, but for members of the community are all going to have these same questions, and it's important for us to package it in a way that tells the story. Kind of, we're still in pretty preliminary phases of this right now, so point taken, and we'll double back on that.
It was interesting. I took a bus tour over the weekend with the city for the Emerging Leaders Program, and we drove by the Northern Tier. And Tom talked about the fact that this is like one of the areas that the Planning Commission is talking about. And so we had the whole bus, and he asked, and we were chatting about like if anyone would live out there, and it was no. But there were suggestions about like could there be parks, could there be any kind of like green space that was developed. But it was interesting to have like a subset of like 20 people around the same age and get a drive-by feel, which obviously is hard when you're in a bus driving by once.
Wait, did you?
If I can, yeah.
Absolutely.
So I actually lived out in this area, I think 3-4 years ago before I moved closer to downtown. It partly, one of the frustrations of living out there is it did feel like a bottleneck. It was really tough getting home from downtown Lansing and turning left there on Coolidge Road. Although huge proponent of the Coleman Road extension. It went through. I think that I don't live out there now, but I have to expect that alleviates a lot of the traffic concerns that are out there. And I mean, I think if you put commercial use out there too, you're going to get some of the same traffic. So you're going to get traffic no matter what you build. I think just different types of traffic, different types of day. I didn't realize it looks like the kind of southeast corner of Coleman and West Road, or there's a lot of single-family homes. Is that part of this bubble that you?
All right.
To me, that it's always looked like those houses were on a bit of an island as development happened all around them. And I don't think a big student housing or a thing like that is appropriate for this space. I think single-family townhomes along there would be a great use of that. Myers close, Eastwood Town Center's close. We certainly liked a lot of aspects of living out there. The traffic was just bad, you know, we wanted to move ultimately as our family grew. But ideally, I think if I could design all of this, what I would do with a lot of these Chandler Crossing, not to name names, but I just did, these apartments out there, is I would get rid of those and put neighborhoods there. I think that would be a perfect use of neighborhoods. I mean, you have the aquatic center. There's great trails out there. I think there really is a lot to offer that, you know, I don't think anybody else lives out here, but I lived out there. I can tell you we liked a lot of it.
I lived out there.
Yeah, so.
I had 2 places.
Yeah, so I think housing could be good. It's tough because you don't want it to be on an island, so it has to be cohesive and it has to feel connected and have a community feel. And yeah, just don't know how to get that.
I think we're supposed to be increasing density, not decreasing.
Well, yeah, I mean,
I think it's a supply and demand issue. I think some of the people, like we're trying to target, like Lauren said, I don't think they want to live there. I think they want to live closer to downtown and some walkable areas to be able to walk to Target or the football games or something like that. I don't know. I would focus on other areas before the northern tier.
I wanted to make one point, if it's salient at this. Just one quick point. Provide a little bit of context to it, and I think maybe I made a similar spiel at the work session, but not everyone was there. I think part of this is planning is partially a thought exercise, and this area developing the northern tier. I mean, a lot of the comments I agree. I hear them, and certainly I'm listening and agree with a lot of what you're saying. And we're not prescribing that this necessarily has to be a high area for housing. Kind of what this came out of was, and I'll keep it brief, is waiting for redevelopment of existing sites is just a really challenging proposition. In East Lansing particularly, with the power of the student dollar and the grip that some of the companies and owners have on properties that have already been developed, that they already have rental licenses. And so, and couple that with kind of the small geographic footprint that the city has, that's not the university, and it isn't some of these long-term, well-established single-family neighborhoods. It's like, well, what's left on the table after those things? So one of the first kind of easiest, and I'm sure this is the way greenfield developers think, which we are not, and that's not the perspective, but is what's out there? What do we have to work with? And there's just not a lot left, barring some of these redevelopment opportunities, and like Chair Bowman has mentioned a couple times, kind of the tweaking of the provisions, and we'll talk a little bit later about accessory dwelling units, like of tweaking the temperature of some of the neighborhoods and increasing density where we can, kind of where those other opportunities exist. So this is just a piece of this puzzle. Some of the other sites that Taylor went through are some other opportunities that we've developed, or that we've just kind of based on some initial criteria, might be prime to rezone eventually to be more in line with the master plan, or to develop these opportunities for more housing. So this is just one piece. But we certainly aren't saying that this has to happen.
So the vacant properties are the ones that are sort of on the outskirts. They had to offer the least resistance, right? That there is indeed no, there's little. Well, right now the zoning is just about to go in flux, right? So they're not even necessarily limited by what the zoning is. Well, anyway, you basically just said that, like somebody that's looking to do something is going to try to find, you got a really large parcel assembled as opposed to individual parcels that may or may not be immediately adjacent, and how do you shift the pieces around so that you've got something of substantial enough size to make it, a good sized development or building. I'm sorry, you had something you wanted to tell me.
I was
right?
mostly going to, Peter beat me to a lot of it. I was just going to say that this is an exercise in visioning. It's just, I understand the constraints of too much potential, but it's just rezoning it or looking at rezoning the flume, changing the flume designation, because it's not technically a rezoning, it's just a designation in the flume, would be a way to direct something there. And so it's an opportunity to say, do we want this there? It says it's going to be, or do we want something? It's an opportunity to ask, what do we want to see there? And so we're just applying a housing lens to this particular parcel and just seeing what we would like to see. So it's just an opportunity to envision, like Peter mentioned.
And actually, as I thought about it, sort of coming up today, at the beginning of our discussion, it was almost serendipitous that it came about 9 o'clock the last time we talked about this. It's sort of, it's an entirely different matter to consider compared to the other sort of currently established neighborhoods. That way we could sort of get, we either, if we don't live in them specifically, we certainly have, we're familiar enough with them, having walked them, or just sort of in our planning commission capacity. Yes, please.
Well, I was just going to say, I know I've struggled with how do we tackle this, especially, we had the work session, that was, to me, I know not everyone could make it, that's a great, the feel was different. We were able to have a smaller group, and we were able to have the screen closer and everything. Would it be to facilitate this type of discussion, would it be better maybe to come back at the next meeting with just one of the areas for a little bit of an expanded discussion on, just like, for example, just at Abbott and Saginaw, just to focus on that for one session?
Please, Chair.
I think that'd be helpful, and I think in particular, I don't know if this is possible, but if you could come up with a few different proposals of what housing could look like in some of these areas, I think that'd be helpful so we could visualize.
Okay.
I think, imaginations can run wild. I think some of us, maybe I'm envisioning townhomes, other people may be envisioning single-family homes or something completely different. So I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly would focus our attention on one of the areas under consideration. Commissioner Wolf, did I see your hand?
Oh, no. I would say, I'm not sure one would be enough for us to spend the whole meeting on.
Oh, sure.
No.
I mean, as business allows.
Business allows.
Just to kind of because we talked about a lot. Taylor went through a lot really quickly, and there's like 5 geographic areas that we're kind of talking about focusing on. So if we were bringing back one, depending on the workload for that particular meeting, 1 or 2 to kind of hyper focus on, would that be more kind of impactful?
Maybe I misunderstood. I thought you were talking about having an official work session again to focus on just one of them.
Oh, no, yeah. A work session would be great, but if we did that, I would hope we could tackle more than that.
Yeah, okay. You were talking about one of them on the agenda
On a regular
for the
meeting,
regular meeting.
if
Okay,
we have
I
the
got it
time.
now. Sorry.
It's your show.
Yeah.
Do you want to move on to the I guess
The next one was talking about implementing the flume as it stands in areas where we don't need to talk about potential changes.
Right.
And so the question to you guys would be, how do you feel the appropriateness of that step is to increase density? Just beginning the process of implementing the flume in an intentional manner that involves educating the neighborhood, educating community members that'll be impacted, and then bringing them forward to a rezoning process on a kind of a larger scale than parcel by parcel, but more of a maybe perhaps neighborhood size. Okay. We'll say no
It
complaints.
doesn't sound like there's any
Okay, great.
objections to that.
Okay. How about we'll plan on coming back with some more information on
Sure.
specifically like Cedar Village.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That seems like a pretty natural. I mean, it outlines, it lines up pretty well with the
Yeah.
proposed rezoning.
Yep. So we just wanted to bring that up and discuss the appropriateness so we can move forward and not just be spinning our wheels in the wrong direction. So good. excellent. That's all I have. And then Peter's going to be talking about accessory dwelling units and then a fence regulation change.
Wait, are we good with the shaping the avenue? Are you comfortable with?
I think that we kind of touched on that in the last work session. I added it to this one to kind of be like a recap of the last one.
Right.
It's information that we've seen before, and we can discuss it surely, but I think that it'll merit its own discussion.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yep, Commissioner, or Vice Chair.
So just looking at these renderings, was Grand River Avenue added to the?
It was.
Okay, great. 'Cause
Yes.
I think that makes a big difference.
I think we added like 7 acres or
Yeah.
something like that.
So you
Yeah.
added the avenue to the shaping the avenue. Okay.
Yes, we did.
Yeah, I like that, and also just wanted to note that I think that the Grand River, Cedar Village, the Hagedorn area, I think presents the most opportunity for this particular kind of upzoning housing thing that we're looking at. I think there's a ton of potential there. So, anyways,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments about this?
No.
All right, and I'll throw it to Peter.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Absolutely.
Not sure why I'm not sharing my screen here.
Oh, accessory dwelling units and then fences?
Yeah. Hi, sorry, I was having some technical difficulties. I might still be. I don't want to derail the meeting here. So I just had a couple notes. This is a so accessory dwelling units. This is a follow-up to an item the commission discussed in June. Let me pull up my notes real quickly. So I wanted to talk in very broad strokes about, I don't think there's anything else to see from me up here. I'm just working off my laptop.
I will look at you.
So let's make sure
As
that
we
the
should.
screen, so what are people at home seeing right now? Okay, well, I'm no longer sharing my screen, so.
Do you want to be on camera? Or do you want your name to be on camera?
No, I was hoping that the video feed of the meeting would be on camera. Well, on the main screen. So I'm not sure what's going on here.
Yeah.
What's that?
So the projector is just plugged in by an HDMI. Plugged in.
No, I'm sharing via Zoom, so I don't want to share via Zoom anymore. We want to see the meeting.
Try that little blue icon in the top right corner of that screen.
Yeah, it's been saying that.
I sent an email to Aaron, he said it seems to be working fine, except now we can't get back to them.
Well,
We have to leave it like that.
So people at home are seeing the meeting?
They were seeing the meeting in a very small.
You're
Seems
fine.
like a pretty big deal.
well, do you have slides to present?
No, but
No,
I
well,
just
then
want to
just
make
go
I just
ahead.
want to make sure that the people at home are seeing the meeting since we
No.
are televised.
That's fine.
Okay. Well,
Our
hopefully
three
they can
viewers
see.
will be. You're good.
Well,
yeah, just go ahead.
you
yeah.
ready? All
Yeah,
right. So I'm a little
absolutely. Yep.
distracted by that. So all right.
So display, sitting in the meeting, you just want display the meeting.
Do you want to take a break or do you want to keep it rolling?
Go to ease if you want.
You just go ahead. I don't know. If you don't have slides, then just people ought to be listening to you anyway.
Okay. Well, I
Because
want to be.
unless it really disturbs you that there's not a camera.
Okay. Hey, guys.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Oh, just.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm gonna talk now. We'll
Yes,
get
please.
back to the meeting. So we talked about this accessory dwelling unit back in June, and really what I wanted to come back here and talk to just what the parameters of a future draft might be. I'm not here with a full draft to consider tonight. There's a lot more work that needs to go into this, but I feel like we're kind of at a point where some decision tree, we're at the policy making decision tree to move forward. So I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of what are the policy options, and I've got a laundry list of things just to run through to talk about the breadth of what a future ordinance might entail. And you don't have anything to react to, and this was intended just as a very kind of brief introduction and then some feedback. So I don't remember exactly what we talked about last time, but the types allowed of these accessory dwelling units, we're seeing 3 different types. inside the unit, a standalone unit, and then, or an addition, maybe to a home. One thing we're considering was the simultaneous construction of new accessory dwelling units. So if an ordinance was developed and a new neighborhood was proposed, for example, allowing those units to be constructed simultaneously along with a new home would need to be implemented into the ordinance. Kind of like what Avondale Square was, the intent there was that we know these units will have them and they're designed accordingly. Design and architecture. These are the categories. So the next category is design and architecture. We've looked at a lot of different ordinances, and we've looked at some kind of guiding principles from some different organizations that have some best practice kind of documents put together. We haven't seen a lot of requirements that the accessory dwelling unit match the principal home, and in fact, Taylor and I have been discussing this topic quite a bit, feel that we don't want to go that direction in terms of requiring that there be some sort of design connection between two buildings. So you may have a traditional neighborhood home with a modern looking 800 square foot, 600 to 800 square foot accessory dwelling unit in the back. So that was the direction we were planning on proceeding in. And I guess part of these, I'm kind of floating the ideas, and if I'm seeing any horribly negative reactions, we'll respond accordingly. Also, I've been seeing a mix, but of not including the entrances to the accessory dwelling unit. So this would be with a standalone accessory unit, not having that face the street, but instead facing a side or a rear. Now, for example, on a through lot, it may face an alley and a driveway that comes off an alley, but on a neighborhood like in just a more traditional lot, what we're seeing is the orientation of these homes with the front door of the accessory dwelling unit, the standalone, with the front door that does not face the street. And just for the composition of the unit itself, would have to have a kitchen, a bathroom, a sleeping area, and I guess a kitchen and a bathroom are really the two other items that they have to have. Size, municipalities are all over the place on size. There are some ordinances that require it that regulate it as a percentage of the lot or percentage of the principal building. So for example, Ann Arbor uses lot size, and they'll say certain lots from this size to this size get a 600 square foot accessory dwelling unit. Lots of this size or greater can go up to 800 square feet. So there's a connection there between lot size and size of the structure. Some do a connection between the accessory dwelling unit and the size of the principal homes, or percentage. So it couldn't be more than like 40% of the principal building. So they're really kind of all over the place. It seems like in general, the size ranges we're seeing are between 600 and 1,000 square feet for the detached accessory dwelling unit. So that's that. Height, again, provisions are all over the place, but most often we're seeing, at least for the detached, capping the height of the accessory dwelling unit at the height of the principal building. But certainly there could be a relationship where it has to be smaller. Location, any zoning district, I think, is where we're going with this right now. But specifically, and I may have mentioned this before, what I see as the path of least resistance, and certainly kind of the easiest to implement initially, is to only allow them in owner-occupied properties, non-rentals. So in that scenario, the owner of the property could reside in either the principal building or the accessory dwelling unit, but it would have to be one of the two. Ann Arbor, over time, it's great to see an example of a municipality that's kind of run the course with this, because they started off with the owner-occupied, and they've opened it up now to some rental properties. But I think starting with the owner-occupied makes a lot of sense and might be the easiest kind of to swallow initially as we go into this, not knowing how many people would actually want to do it. But I can tell you, I think probably for certain that there are a lot of rental property managers that would like to take advantage of it before owner-occupied would. Location, this would be location on the lot. So we're considering right now any zoning district or any single-family zoning district. Typically, the accessory dwelling units, just like a shed, they'd have to be in a rear or side yard, not in a front yard. And some ordinances do require them to be behind the home, like behind the rear plane of the house. I don't know how in this city, based on some of the lot sizes we see, if that would be feasible to be able to have that. So maybe just at least behind what we do with for example, a shed, at least behind the front plane of the home. So it'd have to be set back and no closer to the street than a home. Setbacks right now, keep with the shed example. If it's an accessory building. So a shed, a garage, any detached accessory building only has to be 3 feet off the property line right now. I'm seeing between 5 and 10 right now off the property line. 3 feet seems very close to a property line when you're talking about someone living in the unit. So what we're seeing is between 5 and 10 feet setback off the property line. So that's off a rear or side. Some ordinances we are seeing also require, if it is closer than so many feet to property line, that the requirement of fire rated walls. And actually, in an adjacent municipality I worked at, anything closer than 5 feet to the property line had to be treated with some sort of fire retardant material or some sort of fire rated material. So we'll obviously connect with the fire department before drafting an ordinance. We're only looking at one accessory dwelling unit right now. Some ordinances allow more, and specifically in the Pacific Northwest, they allow, I think, as many as you could potentially fit, but allow more than one. To me, it seems like one would be a good number to start with here, and if it takes off, that we could look at more. And some other ordinances talk about one internal and one external unit. But the thought process that we were using moving forward was to draft an ordinance that just include just one, whether it's inside, outside, whatever, just one. I'll go over some of this stuff. Talked about eligibility, so that would be just owner occupied. There's a lot of kind of technical things. The process. So some communities allow them as conditional uses or special use permits. It makes sense, especially in kind of the light of the form-based code ordinance, to allow these by right and just build conditions around them. So it would be kind of a conditional use, but not subject to any kind of hearing or anything. It would just be administrative staff function, that if you fit these parameters, you can do an accessory dwelling unit with a building permit. Okay. This is just kind of the other category. There are some that limit the lease terms. Now with the short-term rental policy discussion that's been going on for a long time, I don't know where all that's going to land right now, but it's looking like we may lose control over some short-term rentals. But that's a question about how if they are rentals, or what the lease terms of those would be. Some require much longer leases rather than to keep away from the short-term rentals. The units would require a rental license, so that would be a rental license through the city, and would require rental inspections just like any other rental license. And then an interesting component that Taylor discovered was these deed restrictions that require, so if someone were to come to the city and want to do this, let's say they're going to build the detached unit in the back, requiring a deed restriction that both buildings must be sold together if they're sold. So this came, I think, out of the AARP best practice document, because there have been instances in other communities where someone would sell the accessory dwelling unit as a condo unit, or would end up being used as storage or some sort of third-party commercial use instead of staying as the intended use. So that's one consideration, is to require something like that where a deed restriction gets recorded that they're sold together rather than broken apart and not turned into a condo. And that's it. So what we were hoping to have for you at your next meeting or soon is a draft ordinance to consider to potentially move this. If the Planning Commission is okay with a draft ordinance, that the next step would be, I think, adding it to probably a discussion-only item for council to consider to see where this might go. And just for larger context, I mean, this is one leg of the overall project that Taylor was talking about earlier. It's like looking at everything through a housing lens and kind of where can we find ground to add units to the city. And this is one component of that. And it's also part of the near-term housing action plan, which is really intended to address that. And it all came out of the target market analysis. So I guess any big red flags that we're identifying so far? So what I'd like to do is turn all this into a draft ordinance for consideration. and get some feedback on it, and then kind of identify where this might go next.
Any, Commissioner Wolf?
One question from pretty much the beginning of your presentation. Why do we care which way the door of the accessory dwelling unit opens? I can't quite picture.
I can't say it's more, like, it's just, I was trying to bring up as many different policy options that are out there, and it's just one thing that some communities do
Yeah.
for design. I guess I'm not sure that we do care. I
I'm
don't
just
see
wondering
one way or the other.
What the reason, if anyone would know what the argument was, one way or the other.
We'll look into it and further. I don't remember there being any specific justification, unless Taylor, do you?
It just was listed.
Sorry.
In our research of comparable ADU regulations that currently exist in Michigan and then on a national level, it just arose as one of the considerations that popped up occasionally, primarily under the considerations of design, but I don't know if they had other fire code considerations as well. That's something to consider as we move forward in drafting language.
So we're just identifying all the things that are out there and throwing it up and see what sticks.
And then just one comment. At one of our earlier meetings, I said that I thought that one or more, actually I thought there were a couple of accessory dwelling units built in Avondale Square. So I went over there and looked sometime since then. I went kind of down all of them. I found only one, which surprised me, and it's not one of the new construction. It's actually a house whose owner chose not to sell. They resisted the city's offers to buy. Their house stayed in the midst of everything else, and they took advantage of the zoning to build an accessory dwelling, which was a big surprise.
Yep.
It's on the west side?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So
Well,
I
no,
think-
wait. So, yes,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's
Yeah,
on the
and-
west
and-
side.
It's on the
close
west
to-
side.
is it-
Yeah.
is
So
it Snyder?
that was just an interesting quirk of the
No,
development.
that's something else.
That was another stop on our bus tour over the weekend. And apparently there are more than one, but we did not get to see all of them. There are 2 or 3, is what we were told, in the bus tour, in Avondale Square.
Well, I think
I don't
there's
know
only
why-
been one build
Yeah.
so far, though. They can have, it's either 3 or 5 that they can. There was a cap,
Yes.
and
Yeah,
because my immediate question was, well, who gets the 5? First come, first serve. No one has built them now because they do require a special use permit to build them out.
I don't know if Peter's talked to you about it in the past when he's talked about ADUs, but to that case study that you just brought up, that idea, that scenario, most of the ADUs are going to be theoretically be built by homeowners. So they're primarily going to be
Right.
amateurs in that they haven't built before, right? So it's a process that should be streamlined and simple, very clear code, very clearly met standards so that people who are average Joes could theoretically build one in their backyard. So that kind of, and so the barriers to entry should be very clear and not so strenuous, right? So to that point, that's what you see in a lot of the codes, is that overly strenuous ones, they don't end up, the percentage of people don't take advantage of it because they're not big companies, right? So it also.
You're saying the homeowner actually constructs the building?
No, they don't build it themselves. No.
Okay.
I'm, some do, yeah.
I think
Actually, I've seen a lot, you could see like videos of them, I'm sure you could if you want, but you could contract it out in terms of work, but it's initiated by the homeowner and kind of led by an individual who isn't familiar with the construction process in its entirely, or that close up or something. So it's good to have really clear, simple code in this case for ADUs particularly. And that's just best practices that have been mentioned.
Other comments, questions? I've got a couple. Oh, is that a hand? No. I sent you a brief note about the front yard developments. I think it was in Vancouver. And I don't know if you had a chance to look at that, but I
Yeah.
thought that was interesting. So one of the things that person recommends is focus on the corners. So I'll ask you to focus on the corners as potential places if we're going to, there might be places where not building behind the building as it pushes out toward a corner unit, right? If that's where it seems like that's where traditionally density would have been, that's where you get your tall buildings and so on. So maybe that's there's another facet there that's potentially worth
Okay.
looking at. I would imagine that we're probably going to be dealing with limitations on the current coverage in most zones, so that's probably something that, as you know, it's probably something that's going to have to get researched and discussed, in terms of, is that something that we're going to be comfortable changing those
Right.
and how to do that? And then the third rail, how are we going to do this with the rental restriction overlays that cover, I don't even know how much, 80% of the single-family detached residences in our city. I bring it up way too often, and I know we all know that it's an issue, and we all know it's a third rail issue, but that's a reality. There's an answer out there somewhere, but I don't have it. We'll look for it, I guess.
Yep.
That's my 3 cents, I guess.
Okay, well, if you're amenable to it, we'll plan on coming back with at least the bones of a draft ordinance to get some more focused feedback, and we can talk about where this might go from here, or from there, I guess. So thank you for your time on that.
Certainly. Thank you. And fences.
Okay, the last thing I want to talk about tonight, not everyone's probably like me checking email constantly all day, but I sent something out, I think it was late yesterday, with some additions to this addition to the agenda. So if you didn't see it, it's okay. I'm going to go over it right now. This was intended to be a brief, just kind of introduction to the issue. So I'll set the stage. There were actually two, and I'm not going to get into the detail of these sites, but there were two variance denials related to fence height that occurred in summer of 2021. They were both on through lots. So it was a parcel that one parcel had frontage on 3 roads, and another parcel had frontage on a lower trafficked residential street, but then their other side of their property is Saginaw Highway. And there are plenty of, one of these happened to be on Autobahn, so the back of their property was Saginaw Highway. And certainly the folks that lived there don't use Saginaw Highway as their front door. They don't think of it that way. But from the perspective of the fence provisions and fence regulations, they're only allowed to have a 6-foot tall fence on the street line. And it has to be 20 feet back from things. So what I'm going to do is let's continue setting the stage here. So those two variance denials happened. And there was some discussion then with City Council. City Council asked staff to look into fence regulations and what we might just to maintain private property rights while opening up flexibility while also maintaining safety. Easy enough, right? So what we talked about at council last week on the 16th was, I'm going to provide this, I'll do this presentation here in a second, was just kind of what does the current ordinance say, and then what are some policy options that we might consider in the future. So without further ado, I'm going to, I hope this doesn't blow anything up, share my screen and run through this presentation, if I can find it.
You're looking for the lot outside.
Okay, good, you can see it. And this is also, I don't, sure. This is impossible to see. Yeah, well, I don't see it here is the problem.
Nope.
Okay, and you don't have copies of this, so you're going to be
Okay,
relying
yep.
on what I'm putting here. So this was at council last week. Well, the issues with fences, I think we all know. Privacy, noise, both for traffic and pedestrians, but also safety, children. It also serves as a barrier, interior, to not let things out, and visual screening from lights and cars. And our existing policy, we have this regulatory scheme that really looks at fences by type. So it classifies things by opacity. So whether it's a privacy fence and you can't see through it, or whether it's like a split rail fence that you can see through it. And there's different standards for each. So I'll talk about the current setbacks right now, what the height limits are, some provisions related to corner clearance or site visibility, site triangle, and then just a simple, not well placed in the presentation, but I just want to note that building permit's not required for fences. So there's kind of an overlying part of this, because as you'll see, there's a lot of properties that have fences up, and I'm not going to run through all of them, but since there is no building permit required, homeowners are on their own to follow the zoning ordinance, and then the city at that point would have some sort of regulatory role in that, which can be challenging. So our existing policies right now, it's all about open and constructed is the way the ordinance refers to it. So anything more than 40%, it's a split rail, it's a chain link, picket fences, wrought iron fences. Those have different standards from privacy fences. The 40% or less open and constructed are really privacy fences, and you see these all over the place. Right now, these open fences, they're required to be they could be 4.5 feet at the property line, and then 6 feet tall, but you have to be at least 10 feet back. So they can rise to 6 feet, 10 feet back. For the privacy fences, they can be 3 feet tall at the property line, but then they can go to 6 feet tall, 20 feet back. And but the context here is only so this is for street adjacent yards. On your side and rear yards that are not adjacent to streets, so there's going to be 6 feet on the property line. We have a provision allowing for 2 additional feet of a fence if those 2 additional feet are what the ordinance calls at least 75% open and constructed. I've never seen a diagram exactly how we would figure that out, but I think in practice it's this trellis kind of fence topper thing that you'll see these around. So in practice, if I see something like this, if it passed the eye test, and this is something we may want to clarify in a future ordinance, this would allow you 2 additional feet of fence if it's open. So the other thing that we've got is what the ordinance calls a corner clearance, or some people refer to as site triangle, but essentially what it does is on a corner lot, intersection of 2 streets, you would go 40 feet down one street, 40 feet down the other street. Where those points connect in this triangle, this site triangle area, nothing can be taller than 3 feet tall. And that's to protect pedestrians, bicyclists, vehicles, everything. Now, this is only at intersection of 2 streets. So it's to enhance visibility at intersections. So we talked about there's a lot of factors to consider when we look into a new policy, and I've actually learned a couple more since I made this list, but what we did generally, and sometimes this is helpful and sometimes it's not to look at surrounding communities, but you get an idea of the kind of things that people regulate on a given topic. But generally, fences, we're not seeing anything over 6 feet tall, and we're seeing a real mix of whether or not you're allowing them on the property line. For example, Meridian Township allows a 6 foot tall fence on the property line. They also have corner clearance provisions, but they're on the property line. Some are set back 5 feet, some are set back, like East Lansing, 20 feet. There is no magic. Like what I said to council is this is more art than science. There isn't necessarily some kind of table we can refer to that based on the current speed of this street and the number of trips it is, that it should, a fence this tall should be sent back this far. It's really customizable to the character of a community. And it could be different areas within a community that may need different regulations. So, but things to consider here are snow clearance, certainly ease of maintenance. We need access to utilities. We need access to the path, to the sidewalks. We need to consider where people are traveling the most. So specifically, we looked at routes to school. I'll just show you a map here in a minute. Surrounding land uses, lot dimensions, and then just general aesthetics and placemaking. I don't know, everyone's sensibilities are a little bit different, but I think, so I'll speak for myself. My vision of a neighborhood is not one where a 6 foot tall fence that's all you see walking down the street. So this is going to be a little hard to see, but you've probably seen versions of this. This is the ADJOURNMENT annual average daily traffic map for East Lansing, and it doesn't tell us anything we don't already know. Grand River, Abbott Road, Hagedorn Road, Bircham are all the highest traveled roads in this area. Lake Lansing Road, from a motor vehicle perspective. So we looked at where can we go with this? So kind of given the direction that we've been given from council, and so in the context of these variance cases where so we've had some denials related to height, where someone wanted to do a little bit higher fence in an area that they felt was that they were particularly exposed. I guess I could say. I think that represents it pretty well. Both the properties were. One of them was on Abbott. They get a lot of foot traffic of university students going around town, where to and from places, and providing some privacy for the neighbor that lives there, while also trying to maintain kind of all the things, these other considerations we've been talking about. So possibly, instead of this 20-foot setback from streets, maybe there's an option to minimize that or provide some flexibility there. So again, not a one-size-fits-all, but if we're going to consider this, how would we do it? So it's either on the property line. Now, your typical property line is going to be I say typical, it's not always this way, typically 1 foot behind the sidewalk. So if you've got a sidewalk in front of your house, property line is probably 1 foot behind that. So if the fence was on the property line, it would be 1 foot from the sidewalk. Whether or not that's acceptable to most people or ideal is one consideration. Moving that setback to some other distance, you'll see the draft ordinance proposes 5 feet, and 5 feet is certainly not set in stone. What I did with the draft ordinance is we were just trying to put something together to start the conversation. So we put 5 feet in there as a kind of it's not a literal middle ground, but it's just something a little bit beyond right at the property line. And certainly the option will be, as we move forward, a lot of policy discussions. Keeping as is, this ordinance works the way it is. We don't need to change anything. And that may be where we land on this. So what the draft ordinance talks about is reducing the setback to 5 feet from 20, but with the caveat that it's only for specific streets, and specifically for those that are high traffic or specifically on school routes. So no changes for other properties, and this speaks to what I was talking about. There's really I don't think we're seeing that critical mass of whether it's accidents or issues that need change in other areas of the city. But if we're going to pick somewhere, I think along these streets might be some of the best ones. I'll show you a map in a second here. But let's kind of blow through this. If we do decide to go down the road of allowing fences closer to the street, I think we may need to strengthen some of the safety aspects of this. So we already have and I'll talk about that in a second, actually. So what this shows right now is if we're going to implement this, we would suggest having it only on Abbott. And so this is Abbott from Bircham up to Lake Lansing, Saginaw Highway, the entire stretch, Bircham from Grove over to, actually I think we were just talking about doing Hagedorn, but we could extend it all the way east, further east of that. And you'll see it doesn't start at Abbott. It would be one street in at Grove, just to avoid the corner there. There's some multiple family houses. And in corners we want to keep as clear as possible. But what we're trying to avoid are situations like this. Now this is on Bircham Street, and you'll see actually several instances on Bircham Drive. You'll see several instances of fences on Bircham. So this is a fence that's built almost right on the property line. But what we're trying to avoid, and what I'll show you in a diagram here in a second, are visibility issues at intersections. Or we have the corner clearance at 2 streets. What we don't have are any provisions related to intersections of driveways and streets. And maybe it's not important when you've got a fence that has to be 20 feet away. But when the fence creeps closer to the street, now we've got some potential conflicts. And I think this is an example of that. So this is a diagram that's actually another municipality in our area uses of the intersection of 2 streets. Now in this instance, they have 45 feet. The current city ordinance is 40 feet. So that's the only difference here, but it illustrates how this corner clearance provision works. So it's measuring down one street, and then you connect them, and there's your site triangle. And in that area, it would limit anything from the heights of 3 and 10 feet. So it creates that clear, visible area. And just a note, I made this point at council, but the intent is not to remove. We're not saying that we need to remove existing vegetation or trees. I do think that needs to be clarified in a future ordinance, but that is not the intent. It would apply to probably new trees, but also when I've looked into this issue in the past, there are obviously certain trees that lend themselves well to Bean Street trees that have narrow trunks, and then we'll have more, what do you call the top of the foliage, or the top of the tree, above that, so 10 feet and above. And there are certain species that, there are groups that recommend that. So there are opportunities for street trees still, even when a corner clearance is in. So this diagram illustrates the other side of that. So this is an intersection of a driveway and a street. Now in this example, it's 35 feet up the driveway, 35 feet down the street, and these are measured at the curb and then at the edge of the driveway. So that creates this site triangle in this area, so that would limit the height of fences at the intersection of driveways and streets. And again, this just came out of, if the fences move closer, I think we need visibility at the driveways to avoid the situation in that photo. We don't need to get into that. So what council did was they actually moved to introduce a text amendment to send this tricky policy to the Planning Commission for discussion. So what the draft ordinance has in it is a 5-foot setback. It includes the 2 corner clearance provisions, but nothing else, nothing new beyond that. And it also has limitations on just those sections of the streets. So it would be applicable to the areas here identified on the map. So what I was hoping to do just in this item on our agenda tonight was just hear about I wanted to take some quick notes on any kind of immediate reactions you might have to a policy like this, or if there's some aspect of this issue you think we're not covering right now. And the intent here would be we could come back and discuss this again on the 14th, and we do need to have a public hearing on this at some point, but that could come at the second meeting in September. So I think that's the 28th. So that would give the group some time to kind of flesh out some of these. One thing I noticed outside of this when we were talking about other things were fences built up onto something. So whether it's on there are some retaining walls along Bircham. There are some retaining walls in other areas of the city. Whether or not we would allow fences on top of those retaining walls, or whether we would allow people to build up ground and then a fence on top of that. So I just think that needs to be clarified in the future ordinance. So I just wanted to open the floor to kind of some just initial feedback on this, knowing that we're going to have some opportunities to discuss it further down the road here.
Can I ask you a question, Commissioner? How often did this come up when you were on the Zoning Board of Appeals?
Well, I have quite a bit to say about this.
Oh,
Should I
well,
just
yeah,
start?
please.
I'll try to be quick, but yeah, this is deja vu. And just start out by, I'm looking at the letter that we received about this, and right at the beginning, the applicant talks about our outdated fencing policy, and I object strongly to that. I was on the Zoning Board of Appeals, and within the first couple of years, we got quite a few applications for variances involving fences. And as these came in, we realized that the fence ordinance at the time was not adequate. It was too restrictive. And so we we formed an ad hoc committee. Darcy was the staff representative who led that. I was on it. I think there were 2 from the Planning Commission. I think there were just 4 of us. And we came up with this actually relaxed set of rules for fences. And it went through pretty much as proposed. City Council liked it, approved it. So this was in 2011. So this is only 11 years old. This is not some outdated thing that's been here 40 years or something. And to your comment that there have not been a raft of these recently, and the ones that have come in have been on major streets. I think that's what you were saying. Yeah.
Yep.
And so I think that shows we did a pretty good job of it. I like what you're proposing here in almost every way. I think it's what we need. I do agree relaxing it for some of the properties on the major streets is a really good idea. They don't need to have the same restrictions. I did notice that this applicant talked about an incredibly negative experience with the zoning board of appeals, which is really unfortunate. And I just wanted to mention my experience from 2010 with it, where we were very sympathetic to the fact that the ordinance at the time really did not quite address things well. And we initiated, it was the zoning board of appeals that initiated the change. Darcy brought it to city council. They said, yeah, go ahead, form a committee and see what you can do. I was also on the Transportation Commission prior to that. One of the things this applicant says in the letter says the amount of walking and vehicle traffic along those roads, Abbott, Saginaw, and Bircham, has increased significantly since the last policy was written. I believe that is entirely false. Well, first of all, the policy was only in 2011. Second, the numbers I recall from when I was on the Transportation Commission, we saw the daily traffic counts for these major roads numerous times during that period. And I don't recall them being very different from what you show on the map. I don't think there have been huge increases. And then one more disagreement with the applicant. In talking about the driveway access, the letter speaks about that sight distance not being necessary because of the low speed of a vehicle coming out of and going into a driveway. Well, I've got an incident that's fresh in my mind here that is related. I'm going to try to go through really quickly. It did not involve a driveway or intersection or a fence like this, but 2 months ago, my partner was hit by a car, and there was a slight visibility aspect, but it was low speed. She was knocked to the ground, landed on her elbow, went to the hospital, had emergency surgery, now has mostly a metal joint in her elbow. She was in the hospital for 3 days. The bill, which is covered by insurance, is close to $90,000, and she does not have full use of her arm, and we may not know for a year how much use she will have from it. So there's really serious things that can happen. The car was not traveling very fast, and it knocked her to the pavement, and this is the kind of thing that can happen. So it's really scary when you see something like that. That it's just amazing what a car can do, even at a low speed. So then, okay, back to the ordinance itself. I'd like to ask you a question. We have the proposed draft right here, right?
Yeah, yep. And that's a lot of it's placeholder. It's kind of a starting point.
This is a pretty technical question, but the very first part of it is it's 1A I1, right at the beginning, is the provision that allows the fence to be up to 6 feet when set back at least 5 feet from the property line. But it's not clear to me, for a property like the one belonging to the applicant, the one on the corner of Laurie and Abbott, would this allow a 6-foot fence along Laurie also, or is it supposed to allow it only on the side of the parcel that adjoins those named roads? The way it's written, it seems to allow it on any side of the parcel. And my question is really, what was the intent?
I'm not sure I follow. Yeah, please.
So the way that it's written, I understand what you're saying. It says that parcels that front Abbott.
Yep.
So that's a parcel technically that falls under that category. Fronting Abbott is allowed to put 6-foot high fences along 5 foot back from the property line, right? And it doesn't clarify if they have a parcel frontage that is not Abbott.
Right, it
There
doesn't
we
say
go.
which frontage
It doesn't
is
clarify.
limited.
So you're correct that that is something that is not specifically clarified in the ordinance, and I think that's a really good catch.
So what, my first question is, what was the intent?
The intent
That-
is along the frontage.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
that's what I thought.
The intent is the frontage. So that's an easy fix by just saying frontage, the frontage property, the frontage line,
Right.
instead of the parcel that. So
Okay.
it's a language.
Good, because
Correction.
that's the way I would prefer to see it.
Thank you for that.
Um,
The center closed. I didn't realize we had to be out of here at 9, but apparently we need to wrap up sooner than later.
We're not far off.
Okay, well, really, I think the only other thing that I wanted to say is that I'm really glad you put in the provision for driveways and streets, intersections, because that was something that did come up in our discussions in 2011, and I was in favor of doing something different there to make sure vehicles coming out of driveways had enough vision, and the people on the sidewalk had enough vision to see them, and it didn't make it into it. So I strongly support putting that in there, and I don't think I would be in favor of shortening it much at all. The person writing the letter was asking to reduce those distances by a fair amount. Oh, and actually, I wanted to point out there that the diagram for that, the intersection of driveway and street, shows the measurement being made 35 feet along the curb and from the curb into the driveway. But remember that there will very often be a sidewalk you're going to have some land right by the curb, you're going to have a sidewalk, and then some more property that so anyone who's on the sidewalk is going to be much closer to that. It's going to be a smaller triangle for someone on the sidewalk.
Yeah, okay.
And I think that's an important reason that it needs to be fairly generous. Cutting it back to a smaller one is going to reduce that triangle from the sidewalk by quite a bit.
Okay. Thank you for those.
Excellent points. Mindful that this is a draft.
Yeah.
And that we're apparently overstayed our welcome. Are there any other brief comments? All right, appreciate the excellent points. I hope Kathy's okay.
So thank you for that. It's just something to chew on as we'll head into the next meeting.
Yep. With that, motion to adjourn would be in order.
So moved.
It's been moved by Commissioner Wolf and seconded by
Second.
Commissioner Lapine. All those in favor of adjourning, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed? We are adjourned at 9:24. Thank you all for your time.